CADimensions Lunch and Learn. My name is Derek Welker, and today we're going to be talking about the basics of Composer. So my goal for this presentation today is for those who may have never used Composer before or are just getting into Composer and kind of wondering how to go through the entire process of getting things done and how to go through that, animations, views, and stuff like that. So let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is our agenda. So this is what we're going to be going through. So first I'm going to take you through the interface, what everything means, where everything is. I mean, it's set up very similar to SOLIDWORKS, but just kind of go through it and understand exactly where everything is and how it's laid out. Then we're going to take a look at the views, how to create views, because the views are going to be what you're going to use to then export things out to be able to utilize for your documentation. We're going to take a look at bill of materials, how to successfully create a bill of materials. Now, we're actually not going to be creating a bill of materials, but we've got a nice little subject to talk about when it comes to bill of materials. We're then going to be taking a look at exploded views. How do we go about doing or creating explode views? How can we animate those? And along with what tools we use for that. The next thing is animations. These two kind of go together because most of your animations might be actual exploded views, but we'll take a look at the difference between the two. Then we're going to take a look at our export options. So we're going to use what we call our workshops to go through and export. I'll show you how to export all of these different options. And then we'll take a look at updating our documentation, because that's one thing that's great about Composer is if there's any changes inside of SOLIDWORKS that can update in Composer, and then you can then update your documentation with the updated exports from Composer. All right, so let's get into talking about the interface here. Now, this is just a screenshot I grabbed from Composer, so I'm going to take you through this. So up at the top, we've got our ribbon menu. Now, if you're familiar with SOLIDWORKS, you know that this is very, very similar. The only kind of caveat to using SOLIDWORKS Composer is the ribbon tabs, I guess you'd call them, are on the top instead of the bottom, right? So they're at the top instead of the bottom over here. Taking a look on the left-hand side, they call this section the left pane. I've also heard it referred to as like your view pane. But then right below it is your properties pane. So your properties are any sort of properties of what you're actually selecting on. So depending on what you're selecting on will then change the different properties. Now in the center is your viewport. Now this is very similar to SOLIDWORKS, that we could consider this your graphics area. You also have your reference triad, which is in the opposite corner of where SOLIDWORKS has it. And then over on the right hand side you have your workshops. Now this is what's going to be exporting everything out. Now what you'll notice is at the very top in your ribbon menu, you have one tab for workshops. Now this is anything that pops up over here. And then you do have your publishing. So we have the ability to publish out our views, bill of materials, technical illustrations, our high resolution images, along with video and animation library. So we'll talk about this in a little bit. But kind of just get yourself familiarized with the interface. If you're familiar with SOLIDWORKS, it's very much the same. Now, let's take a look at our views. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over into Composer, and I'm going to show you what it means to create views and how we go through of utilizing the tools to create these views. Now, in the left pane, you'll notice we have our view pane here, our left pane. These are the three options that you're really going to need to know. Now, the first one is creating a view. Now what you do is you get the view exactly how you want it to be, and then you create it. Now the next option here that's got the little red circle on it is update view. Now this is an icon that you see when you just want to update that view. So maybe you've tweaked some colors or just changed the way you look at things or added something. Instead of creating a new view, you just update the view that you have selected. Now you have the ability to redraw views. Now what that means is, like, say you go into SOLIDWORKS and you change that model, you update it into the new model, you can go through and quickly redraw all the views instead of having to go to each one and do that. So let me hop over into Composer and I'll show you how we would go through creating stuff like this. Now what we do is we go into our Views tab. So we have all of these different tabs here. The first one being Assembly. So this is where you can kind of select on things that you want to see, select things that you want to turn off. So if I select on like a wheel of some sort, then we can change our properties. Now, all of this comes intuitive when you're talking about your views. So in your views, if you want to change colors of things, you can select on the specific wheel, for example, change the color, opacity, or anything like that. Also, if you want to change like the background or something, you can go into your views or scenarios or whatever it might be, or even just selecting on the background, you can then change a lot of the background color or anything like that. So the first thing that I like to do when I have a composer model is I like to just grab a view and just call this my default or my blank view. So as you go through and you create all these different views, you want to have one view that's just kind of it right out of the box, you know, just kind of a standard view that you can kind of tweak. So as you go through and start hiding things or changing things, you just want to have one that you haven't really messed with. So I always grab one and make that a default. So now what we're going to do is maybe throw in like a digger, or that would be kind of like our detail view, or we might want to move things around. So let me do like a rear view here. So we'll do like a rear 3/4, or we can go up and we can align the camera by doing a specific type of view here, right? So we can do like our 3/4 view, right? And I might call this like my, you know, like rear view, maybe just angle this down a little bit. All I do is I click on create view, Control E for short, and then I'll just change this to rear view. So you can see how simple it is to create views. Now, if I tweak this a little bit and I say, okay, well, maybe I want this to be my rear view, I just go over and just hit update view, and it updates that rear view, right? Now, what you'll notice is when I click between different views, it animates them. Now, just keep this in mind, and just keep this in your back of your mind when we talk about animations. So let me change a couple more things. We'll change on my background color to maybe be gray. We may want to turn on my ground and turn off my grid, and I can have this as kind of like a spotlight view. Maybe I'll call this spotlight. So you can see how simple it is to create these views. But now let's talk about getting into diggers and other sorts of annotations. So the digger is activated by clicking spacebar on our computer. Oops, that actually just changed my view here. But I hit spacebar and it gives me the digger. Now, the first thing I like to do is turn on my tools. And what you'll notice is the center of this digger is, or the center of the digger is your area of focus. But I want to put my digger over here, and I want my area of focus to be the center. So what you do is you say change center of interest. Now, the caveat here is you got to click down here and hold onto this tool and go to where you want it to look at. And then you let go. Now we can change some things. We can lock and unlock our depth direction. We can actually just capture a 2D picture, so then we have no more adjustment of it. Or we can do like some sort of light change. So if I click and drag, I can then put a light in my model or in the digger exactly where I might want it to be. If I just drag out, it doesn't bring a light. Now here is where we can change the radius, and then over on the other side we can change the zoom angle. Now this is because we are on the zoom property. If we take a look at some of the other things, we have cutting plane, X-ray, onion, and onion skin. Now cutting plane takes a plane and it just creates like a section view cut through it. Now when we do an X-ray, it kind of does something very similar, except it hides components and stuff that you're looking through is transparent. If we change to an onion skin, all it does is it's either hidden or show. There is no secondary transparency that you see in X-ray. So we typically see this just in a zoom. We're going to go ahead and zoom in, and then we're going to go ahead and we can capture this so there's no adjustment. Now one thing you'll notice is the resolution of this image isn't super great. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and create a view, and we're going to call this default digger. So I'm going to go back to my default, and then I'm going to add different, some different, things to it. So some annotations or stuff like that. But you can see how nice it was just having a default view. So instead of me going in and having to like hide my digger and undo the things that I did to start with a blank canvas, that's where I just go back to that default view. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in and kind of add in some more annotations. So in the author tab in the ribbon menu, we have the ability to add in like arrows. So in this case, I'm going to add in like a circular arrow, and I might try and add it on like the wheel or something. So you click here to specify kind of the circle that you want to go around, and you can specify that as being my arrow. Right? If you click on it, you have the ability to adjust it, change properties if you want. In this case, we can see the arrow. You can also adjust back kind of how far you want it to be. In this case, I just kind of made a complete mess of it. So let me start all over again. So I'm going to start here, kind of drag out my circle. There we go. Now, selecting on the circle, we have a lot of different options here. We can kind of change, you know, how we want this thing to be set up by clicking some of these points. We can even kind of adjust the thickness of this out a little bit. So we do have a lot of these properties that we can adjust to help us. Now, selecting on it and going down into our border and shape and color, you know, we can change a lot of the different options here. In this case, it is specified as being red. Maybe I want it to be green and to have like a black outline. So in this case, it is black, but because I'm selected on it, it looked kind of orange or something like that. Right. So you can see we can kind of adjust it however we might want. We might want to bring it in. And maybe I want to bring this back just a little bit. Right. So all I'm doing is, you know, putting in some of these annotations that you'll see, and now we can then create views from this. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put a label on something. So I'm just going to drop my label and place it. And by default, it uses some sort of specific setting. So down on our tooltip, you can see it just uses the name. So if we had a bill of material, we could then specify if we wanted it to look at the bill of material ID or anything else like that. We can also change it to like our BOM ID, which in this case we don't have a BOM yet. So we can have a name, or we can just do a string. So in this case, this says tire. I can go in and just say custom tire. All right. And one thing that is nice is I can go in, I can change the background of this to being like white. You know, I can change anything I want, but also we have different styles that we have on things. So if I change the style of something, right, I can change it to being something completely different and have a custom style specifically for it. Now, in this case, the style that I had must have turned off my string here. There we go. And you can see that this style is laid out slightly different. So if you always like to have a specific style label, whether it be color, outline, or even just, you know, line to it, this is where you'd go in and you'd specify a style so that you can kind of always use that. But it is a quick way to kind of adjust the specific, I guess, visual properties of your label that you're using. But this is how you would do it. You know, you go in and you then specify, you know, what kind of text that you want, what you might want it to have, and then change all the different properties. So when it comes to creating views, you know, we do have diggers, we have the ability to align cameras, you know, we've got zoom to fits, and then we just have different visibility. So when we're talking about creating views, you know, we can always click on stuff and hide them and show them or anything like that to help us. So in this case, I can like hide this here, and then we can use that in our specific view, and then we just go in and create a view. So any of these things that you're seeing me do can all be incorporated into a view that can be incorporated somewhere else. All right, let's hop back over into the presentation here, and you know, we just talked about views. So I talked to you about how to create views, update views, use the digger, and any sort of other annotations. And pretty much all the other ones, like the dimension stuff, is pretty user-friendly, you know. So once you figure out how to use, you know, the arrows and the labels and stuff like that, generally the rest comes pretty easy. So now let's talk about bill of materials. So Composer always had bill of materials and your ability to generate BOM IDs, but there's something that has changed. I wouldn't say we would be using bill of materials inside a Composer as much as we might have been in the past. Your bill of materials that you're going to be creating in Composer are going to be more kind of like IKEA style parts lists. But the great thing is that as of Composer 2017 Service Pack 3, SOLIDWORKS Composer has the ability to import a SOLIDWORKS bill of materials. Right? Slow clap for that one for anybody who's been waiting for that. But if you create a bill of materials inside of SOLIDWORKS, when you go to import the model, you have the ability to import the SOLIDWORKS BOM so that all of your IDs and everything will be maintained. So that's why I said, you know, our bill of materials, it's kind of a sore subject because, You know, we're not essentially going to be using them inside a composer, but if you do, it might be for like an IKEA style or something that's not specific, you know, a specific parts list, maybe different from your internal BOMs that you're using to manufacture this. You might just have a bill of materials for your instructions. So obviously there might be some reasons as to why you would use bill of materials or not. But I'm not going to be showing it in this case because I just wanted to point out the fact that, you know, SOLIDWORKS can now bring in those bill of materials. Or SOLIDWORKS Composer can bring in the bill of materials from SOLIDWORKS. So now let's talk about exploded views. So we actually have a transform tab in the ribbon bar for creating exploded views. So some of them being, we've got linear, spherical, and cylindrical. So linear works very much like the explode inside of SOLIDWORKS that kind of does an auto space components when dragged. I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's like auto space components when dragged. So you drag them out and then it automatically spaces them. That's what a linear does. But the great thing about Composer is it has spherical. So you can literally just click on a whole bunch of things and create like a general radius or diameter, and it will explode all of those to that. So let's hop over into Composer and let me show you that. All right. So let's go back into our default view. I'm not going to save that view. Right. And let's talk about some of those linears options. So if I click linear and kind of click some of my selections here, I'm going to have to control select. And as I drag them out, you can see that they do kind of space. Now, I have to have more than one thing selected to then adjust, because it leaves one thing exactly where you are. So if I select on this, this, and this, what you'll notice is one of them will stay and then the rest of them will go. Or at least they should have. Maybe I didn't get a full control here. But the linear can be kind of a pain in this case, but not too bad for what we're trying to do. Now let's take a look at the spherical options. So if we go into spherical, we literally, I'm going to go around and specify all my wheels. But what I can do, if I go into my assembly tab, go to my toy car, I can literally find those wheels here. Maybe scroll down a little bit and find more wheels if I'm missing any. Right? So you can use your assembly tab to then grab things on. So I'm going to grab my spherical, then you literally just grab this circle and go out with it. And what you'll notice is it creates a giant spherical explosion of what you're trying to do. So the spherical can be quick, can be nice if you're just trying to quickly explode things. You don't really care where they go. Cylindrical works the same thing, same way. But if you don't want to use either of those approaches, let me show you something else. We have the traditional translate, free drag, or rotate. So I can literally click on something, hit translate, and just move this out where I want it to be. This is what you're used to having inside of SOLIDWORKS. Right? So I can kind of select multiples and bring those out as well. Now, one thing you can also do is you can kind of highlight, select something, and then just say restore neutral position, and it'll actually put it back. So if you drag out something that you didn't really want, you can select on it and say restore neutral position, and it'll go back to where it was. Or if you end up creating your explode view and then realize that you need to put things back to create another view before you've created a default view, for example, you can just use that restore neutral position instead of trying to drag it back and place it exactly where it was beforehand. So that's one thing that's nice. So that's how you would do explode views. You literally just make a selection and make your adjustment, right? So not too bad. So let me hop back over in here. So we kind of covered explode views and how to do it. It's not overly complicated, but now let's talk about animations. So inside of SOLIDWORKS Composer, animations are a keyframe based. It's very similar to SOLIDWORKS. You basically have a big time slot and you have frames or keys that you put onto each of different things. So some of them being, location, the view, the orientation, the opacity, and anything like that can be changed or adjusted through them. So you can use views or keys in your animation. So what I mean by that is if you created exploded views, what you can do is you can just grab those views, bring them into your timeline, and it will automatically create an animation sequence for you. Now, the only caveat to that is that when SOLIDWORKS or Composer transitions between views, it automatically kind of does its own animation, and you're limited to that. If you do the animation and leave and use the keys, you have way more control over this specific animation, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So what I want to do is I want to highlight these specific tools here. So you have the ability to set keys, set location keys, set camera keys, and set digger keys. The reason why this is crucial is because if you move the timeline to like 2 seconds and you start moving something, it's going to put a key there, but it'll start moving from the very beginning to 2 seconds. So you might want to drag to 1 second, set a location key for that, and then go to 2 seconds and then change it. And then it will change from 1 to 2 instead of going from 0 to 2. Hopefully that makes sense, but we'll hop into Composer and take a look at this a little bit further. Now, to turn on animation, you just select on animation here. I'm going to say save, and we're going to save a view. And what you'll notice is we get our timeline down here. Now, what you'll notice is if I just drag in a default, we can say, hey, look, we're going to start at default. We're going to go to rear view at 1 second. We're then going to do a spotlight at 2. Then we're going to do a digger at 3. And we'll do our last one at 4. Right? So you can see how quick it is to kind of adjust between all of these things. Right? So I can kind of play through. And you can see how it does things. Now, the only thing it did not do is it did not bring in my digger, because we have not set a digger tool for that. So we need to make our digger viewable here. So we need to go ahead and turn it on. So we need to view or turn on our digger to be able to view it in here. I'm not going to do that, but we can kind of play around with that, you know, if need be later on down the road. So this is what I was talking about. You know, you're kind of limited to how it wants to do things. But between here and this rear end, if I want it to maybe hold here for a little bit, or maybe move somewhere else, I can literally move it, and we can set a camera key here. So what you'll notice is it'll go from this position here, which was one of our views, to something else, then back. So we can actually go in here and just create different keys. Now, when we talk about animation, what you'll notice is this animation is moving in its own little way. And if we want to move it piece by piece, we would either have to create separate views, or I can go to like 5 seconds. I can click on something, and I can translate it out, and then we'll know that this creates some sort of key for that. Right? So between 4 and 5, that's going to explode. So you can actually move in your keys and then set something. Right? So let's go through and let's play this through. So you can see it as it kind of makes our adjustments, moves around, and creates that. Now, up to this point, we can now then save this out. So if we go into our workshops, we can save this out as a video and save out our animation if this is what we'd want to do. Now, this is where we'd get into our technical illustrations and our high resolution images as well. So you can see animations work very, very similar to SOLIDWORKS. So if you've been doing them in SOLIDWORKS, moving to Composer is going to be very nice, except it's going to be a little bit more easy. One thing to take note of is there's these markers here, and it tells you where you have each of your views that you're using. You can also create new markers. So I could call this like custom view. So you can actually put in little notes to yourself on what it's actually doing at those points in time. Now, this is something that SOLIDWORKS doesn't have, and that's one leg up that Composer has on it. Now, let's hop back over and kind of recap here. So our animations are fairly easy. You know, you can set all of your different keys that you have. Now, another thing to take note of is that if you select on any sort of property, the set keys icon will change to being a set properties key. So it's not one we went over, but it will be there if you're trying to adjust properties of a specific component. So you can go in, make the change there, and you'll see that property tab. Now, if you play around with this, you'll see it. Now, I kind of talked a little bit about my export options being video and high resolution image and stuff like that. So I want to talk to you about the difference between a high resolution image and a technical illustration. A high resolution image is going to be like a JPEG or some sort of raster static image that you're going to be used. And this is what the export looks like. Now, you can kind of start with the profile. A profile is kind of like the template that you want to use. You do have the ability to go through on different options. Now, one of my favorite options is the ability to select multiple. So if you click on multiple, you also have a checkbox for views, and you can literally go through and export all of your views in one single shot. So you can say multiple, do my views, and it'll literally just export all your views. You can also change the background, remove the ground, do anything like this. But now here's where it comes into play, is quality. You can turn up your quality. You can change the DPI to be higher, and the higher the DPI, the higher the resolution. Now at the top, we have a detail view. Now you might be asking yourself, what's the difference between a detail view and the digger? The high resolution image in a detail view has much higher image quality, higher resolution. So if you want to use the digger, but you're not getting the quality that you're really looking for, go ahead and use that high resolution image, and it'll be you'll definitely get it to be better. I'll show you an example of that in the next slide. Now, a technical illustration is something that's going to be used in Internet Explorer. It doesn't have to be, because you can just have it saved out as a vector image. Now, anything that is a technical illustration is a vector image, so it's obviously going to be able to scale really well, but it can also be used in Internet Explorer and anything like that. And you can see that there's a ton of different options for that, along with detail view. So let me hop in and show you what it might look like to use a technical illustration. So this is a technical illustration, and here, this is the export, and you can see when I hover over components, it highlights. Now, this is all set up in Composer, so if I select on something, it then brings me to something else. So this is where you'd export out technical illustrations of everything that you're doing so that you can have these interactive guides for this. What you'll notice is if I highlight on the bill of material, it also highlights the component itself. So this is where a technical illustration comes into play. This is not something that a static image can do, right? So any sort of selections that I make will open up that specific component and be adjusted that way. And also any sort of highlight will adjust it in the bill of materials. So these are your export options. It's either going to be a video, high resolution image, or technical illustration for the most part. And this is where I wanted to show you kind of what it looks like, or what a technical illustration can be different than a high resolution image. Also, a technical illustration can also have colors and shadows. It doesn't have to be just white and black, so that is one common misconception there. So we talked about our different export options here, but you know how I just mentioned the digger versus the detail view in a high resolution image? This is what the difference looks like. The top left is a digger captured 2D image, and the bottom right here is using a high resolution detail view image. You know, the quality is much, much higher in that high resolution image. So if you want a detail view and you want something that's going to be high quality, use a high resolution image and just change the DPI or the quality up, and you'll be happy with it. It works all the same. It's a little bit, I guess, a little bit more complicated to use than the digger, because the digger is fairly easy, but you do get better results from it. So now the last thing that I want to talk about is updating your documentation. So what happens inside of SOLIDWORKS or Composer if the SOLIDWORKS model's changed? So inside of Composer, you go to File, Update, and you just say Update the current document. You click on there, you then browse to the file, and you click on the file, and it updates. Now you can also update other Composer files, but you can just use the SOLIDWORKS file itself. So if you have access to the SOLIDWORKS files, you can do that, and it will then update everything in Composer. Now, what if you use these, you export this out and use the high resolution images in some sort of technical documentation? So in Word, what you can do is you go into the File menu, you go down in Info tab, and you go to Edit Links to Files, and it'll show you all the images that you have inserted into the document, and you can hit Update now. Now, when you're importing an image into Word, you have the ability to insert and link. So if you do insert and link or embed or whatever the wording is, you can actually, they'll automatically update as long as the file names stay the same. So when you export out, if you export all of your views together, like I said, and just use the default naming scheme, when you go and you like update the SOLIDWORKS model, then you update Composer and you just re-export those, as long as they go to the same location with the same name, it'll automatically update your Word document if you have that link and embed. If not, you'll have to use this update process. But it's obviously not too difficult. But these things are things that aren't really pointed out as ways for you to get everything in. So my goal here today was kind of start you off of here's the interface, here's what it looks like, let's get comfortable with it, and then I'll show you kind of the tools that you really need to know to use Composer. And I'm sorry if I went by really quick, but I tried to fly through a lot of different topics in a short amount of time, and I think we covered that. So I took you through everything that you might need to know getting into Composer. Obviously, we have other resources if you're trying to dive into the weeds of specific topics, but this is going to be a good one that's going to get you through all the different things on a very high-level overview. If you have any questions, this is where you can feel free to ask them at this point or leave them in the comments. My name is Derek Welker. I thank you for tuning in for our Lunch and Learn, and I hope to see you on the next one. Have a good day.
Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and our blog for more great content by clicking on the links in the description below.